The Bisset Love Letters, The Basics, Part 1. This is a story about a Regency era romance of love letters found 200 years after they were written. Very similar to Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen's book, Persuasion. Where were these letters found? They're found in the village of Sherborne in Gloucestershire, not the Sherborne in Dorset, in a beautiful setting on a massive estate called the Sherborne Park Estate, which is now held by the National Trust. It's also recently been the setting for Spring Watch. It includes the National Trust property of Lodge Park, but one the National Trust does not own is Sherborne House, which is where these letters were originally stored. This is the home of Lord Sherborne and his ancestors for about 500 years, and this beautiful village in the Cotswolds was owned by Winchcombe Abbey for 100 years, and it's a beautiful setting. And these love letters, there's only one business in the village, and a tea shop. So in a cottage in Gloucestershire many years ago, I went on the recommendation of someone. They said, these are the local historians, you want to go and meet them, they've got a lot of documents. And Jenny and Edward Jewell, they opened up their home to me, many documents that their grandson owned. He was out of the country at the time. I asked for a 2-hour appointment and a 2.5-month stay. I went most days and digital copied with a camera lots of their documents. And in that stash of documents that Eddie Jewell had received from his work emptying the house out, Sherborne House, when it was sold, emptying the attics out, and he didn't think that this should be thrown away, and he just kept it in for many years, and his grandson had helped to store those and preserve those. And so we know about an epic romance that starts in the era where Jane Austen is writing, and it starts in 1802, 1803, and this is part 1. The first letter that exists is from 1811, but fortunately the letter talks about the romance before they try it again in 1811. And you can see that these are heart-wrenching letters. This miserable anxiety, which has lately harassed my mind, compels me once more to address you. So he's trying to get her to marry him again, and I'll tell you who she is and who he is in just a minute. This romance starts heart-wrenching. Sometimes they're hard to read. Sometimes they're written crossways because it was cheaper to post a letter. You didn't want to add an extra piece of paper on. Sometimes it takes quite a bit to post an extra piece of paper. You can hold these letters up to light and see the years that the letter's stationer made the paper. Then I found another of the Bisset love letters, thinking there was about 110 of them. Found another one many years later, 4 doors down from where I found this stash of the Bisset love letters, and in the home of another widow, of someone who had worked for Lord Sherborne. And like Mr. Jewell, he felt that it was wrong, that these letters were being thrown in the skip, that something needed to be preserved. And she said that her husband would have been really excited that that these letters were of great importance. There were lots of letters that she offered me I got to take pictures of, but this one is the top one she gave me was the Bisset love letter that is really the best of all. That another time. So this is a Sherborne House in Gloucestershire. It was the seat of Lord Sherborne. He was raised to the peerage in 1784. It's a 60,000 square foot house, and somewhere in the attic these letters were there. They are between Lady Catherine Howard, you can see on the left. This is a miniature of her. And this is in the family of the current Earl of Suffolk. This is a miniature painted by Hopner in approximately 1803. She is considered one of the great beauties of the age, and in fact, her portrait is published along with other ladies of rank and fashion, showing off some of the English beauties. She has fallen in love with the local vicar, and this is the only known portrait of him. His name is Reverend George Bisset, and he just lives a few miles away, and he's quite a Here is a map showing this location, and the location of these events is mostly in Wiltshire. So we have Malmesbury, which has the really famous medieval Malmesbury Abbey, and he is the vicar there. And just about 4 miles away is the village of Charlton, and where Charlton Park is, which is the home of the Earls of Suffolk since the early 17th century, and the Earl of Suffolk. And so, in the 4th of October, 1802, George writes in a letter reflecting back, he says, "I shall never forget while I have any memory left that I met you by mere accident." And they were walking in the park. And what that means, especially if you are an American, what that means is it was fine to walk on the great estates for leisure, for exercise, and they ran into one another and started talking. And then he was invited over to the house several times to Charlton Park, and most people had no idea that they were falling in love. In fact, she seems to be very fond of him before he realizes it, before he realizes his feelings for her. And then he asks her to marry him, and there is, of course, great resistance to such a proposal. She was only 24 years old, and he was 37 at this this time that they met. So there was an age gap between them. She's about 24, so she's around the same age as in Persuasion, where the heroine there is sort of getting much older than Mary. Here is her family. Her dad and her mother, the Earl and Countess of Suffolk. She has 2 brothers. One has been tragically killed, and she had a twin brother that died as a toddler, as a baby, and another brother that died as a toddler. And so it's just the 2 siblings alive right. And this is a picture of Charlton Park where she grew up. It is known today for the WOMAD Festival, which is held every year on the grounds of Park. And here are some of the close-ups of the home in which she grew up, and many of the letters are hand to this great estate. This is the interior of Charlton, and this is the Earl of Suffolk's brother, Maurice, sometimes known as Morris Howard, and he was gracious enough to let me visit the Great Hall, and he's the one who helped me out a lot about her. Today, much of Charlton Park is leased out by the Earl of Suffolk in private flats, and these are magnificent flats. And this would have been her dining room, where she would and probably had some uncomfortable conversations with her family because they are very against them. He is the vicar at Malmesbury Abbey. You've probably heard of that. It's a pretty famous medieval place, and it looks like here it's in ruins, and it is partially in ruins. It destroyed largely in the Reformation, but there is a part of it here that's definitely not in ruins and is the parish church. And this is how he makes his living. He holds this church as the parish. He's the vicar there, and he is a rector in another part of Wiltshire at. And his family is important as well. His father was a doctorate of divinity and is an archdeacon in the Irish church, although he is a Scotsman. So it's kind of a Scottish family, but I don't think that George is born in Scotland. His mother is English from the Isle of Wight. He has an infamous older brother who has an unfortunate name. His name is Maurice or Morris George Bisset. And he is infamous because he's involved in one of the greatest scandals of the late 19th century. Late 18th century. And if you've read the book Lady Worsley's Whim or seen the miniseries, this is him. Unfortunately, his younger brother is named George, and he is the clergyman who writes the love letters. And they have other siblings as well. And I'll just point out that this one is going to be important. His name is William Bisset, and he will become the Bishop of Raphoe in Ireland, which is now an extinct diocese. And they have a young sister named Sophia, who's very important to the story as well. And here is what Maurice George or Morris George looked like in the television series Lady Worsley's Whim. And there are stated reasons for opposition to the marriage, which are very predictable. And like the novel plots of the day, including Jane Austen, you have people that have fallen in love that are of different social status, different rank, different fortune, and they have all these strikes against them. The differences in fortune, a gap in social status, a gap in their age, and she doesn't have very much inheritance, which I'll talk about in the basics of this love story, part 2. And she has a condition. And by that, I mean she suffers from great, terrible, debilitating anxiety. So she's not your typical heroine that Jane Austen portrays. She is often unable to go out due to her anxiety. So this ends part 1. And please tune in again for part 2 of the Bisset love letters.